Hey guys, what is going on? Anthony here with Pistons Talk. Hope you guys are having a great weekend so far. What I wanted to do today was react to this BleacherReport.com article. And the article is NBA teams that could be aggressive sellers by the 2025 trade deadline. Now, we haven't even had preseason yet. But your Detroit Pistons were one of five teams that Bleacher Report did put in this article. So what we're going to do is react to it, read what they have to say, and kind of give an opinion at the end of this video of if we agree with Bleacher Report or not. So let's get into it, you guys. So for the Detroit Pistons, our Detroit Pistons, right? They go on to say that nobody needs to worry about the Detroit Pistons losing enough to be considered sellers. They will. President of Basketball Operations Trajan Langdon and his newly installed front office have stocked the roster with extra spacing, which should be a functional boon for guys like Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, and Ron Holland. But Detroit is reliant on too many youngsters and lacks the known infrastructure at both ends of the floor to presume they'll do more than hover around the bottom 3 or 4 in the Eastern Conference. Now, this is written by a guy that is not from the city of Detroit. This is written from a guy that writes for a national pundit like Bleacher Report. Now, I tend to agree with him. I think the Pistons will be sellers at the deadline. Do I think they will improve? Absolutely, guys. Do I think they're going to win 14 games next season? No. I think they will win more than 14 games. Vegas has us around the 24.5 line right now for wins. So they think we'll be 10 games better in the win total, which, 24.5 games isn't really something to be bragging about. But they do make a good point in terms of the Pistons are really relying on the youth and the young talent that we have on this team. I think Cade Cunningham, going into year 4, I think we know what to expect from Cade Cunningham. We know that we're going to get 20 points, anywhere from 7.5 to 8 assists a night on pretty decent, volume in terms of just shot attempts. Jaden Ivey, I think, is a big question mark. Don't really know what his role is going to be. Don't know if it's going to be starting next to Cade. Don't know if it's going to be off the bench. I'm not sure yet. Ausar, I'm going to be really interested to see what happens there. If he's in the starting lineup, if he's coming off the bench, how is he progressing in terms of blood clots? I know he did get cleared recently, but how has he progressed? Has he taken a step back, or is he still the defensive menace as he was last season? Ron Holland, I think a lot of us are very excited about to see how he will do with the Pistons. I don't really know what his role is going to be either. I would assume, off the bench role, kind of, start him slowly. But saying that the Pistons would be bottom 3 or 4 in the Eastern Conference, that's kind of like where they were last year. They were one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. I think, now this is just me, I think they can kind of hover around anywhere from 13th to 10th. Because if you look at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, it's not the strongest. I think there's a lot of room for teams that did not make the play-in last year to possibly make the play-in. So I disagree there. I think they will be competitive, and I think they'll be a lot more competitive, given who the coach is. But they also go on to say, do the Pistons have the talent to entice the outside interest required to crack the list? They mentioned Simone Fontecchio, who Pistons cannot trade until December 15th. Those are the rules for players that sign new contracts with their team. Malik Beasley as well, can't trade him until December 15th. Tobias Harris, they mentioned, won't have a ton of suitors because of his contract. Which I think the Pistons want Tobias Harris here for the duration of his contract. I think they need him for the next 2 years because we don't really have a traditional, forward, if you will, a power forward. But, Fontecchio, Beasley, can't trade them till December 15th. They go on to say throwing Isaiah Stewart into the mix gets us closer, but it's Ivey, Thompson, and Duren that get Detroit over the hump. including them seems asinine at first glance, and perhaps it is, but none of them were drafted by a Langdon-led front office. This regime will be less married to them than its predecessor. And I tend to agree with that. Now, do I think Trajan Langdon is going to trade Asar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart, Jaden Ivey, or Jalen Duren? I'm not sure. I don't know what he thinks of them, but watching his presser, I think it would be, to Bleacher Report's point, asinine to try to trade all of them. I think Trajan wants to evaluate them. He wants to evaluate this young core that Troy Weaver in the previous front office drafted to kind of get a better, I guess, gauge of what he has, if he feels that they're worth keeping around, like Isaiah Stewart, who signed a contract extension. Is Jalen Durden and Jaden Ivey players that the Pistons possibly explore, giving contract extensions because they're, eligible to sign contract extensions going into next summer in 2025. So I think I agree with a lot what Bleacher Report is saying that, Trajan isn't really, tied to any of these guys. The only players that he's drafted so far are Ron Holland and Bobby Klitman. The rest have been Troy moves. But getting back to the article, if the Pistons are obliterating expectations, I'd bet all three being available, and even if they're playing well, Langdon may be more inclined to move any one of them at their peak value. This is a whole nother conversation, and I've heard it from other Detroit Pistons podcasts talk about, sometimes the Detroit Pistons over recent years have really held on to guys longer than they needed to, and the value kind of plummets. Like, one player I'll mention right off the top of my head is Andre Drummond, and I know he's not a part of the Detroit Pistons anymore, but the Detroit Pistons had plenty of opportunities to trade him while he was here in Detroit. We held on to him too long, and then when we did trade him, we only got a second round pick from the Cavs. Bleacher Report is basically citing, Trajan may look to possibly trade Jaden Ivey, possibly trade Asar, maybe Duren, because maybe the value right now for all three of those guys are higher than we actually think, because we're not general managers, we're just fans at the end of the day. We may think these guys aren't valuable, but other front offices and other organizations may believe that they are valuable. But my personal opinion, I don't think they trade Asar Thompson. I don't think they trade Jalen Duren. I know there's been discourse about Ivy. I don't know what his future holds. I'd like him to stay in Detroit. I really would. But again, you have to also take into consideration he's eligible for a contract extension. So is Jalen Duren. And that is something that we're probably going to be talking about all season long. We really are. It's going to be under a fine microscope. So I'm just warning you guys now that not just myself, but I can see a lot of Detroit Pistons podcasts like myself talk about this, talk about, expectations for the season for Duren and Ivy. Do the Pistons offer one of them a contract extension going into next summer? But again, just warning you guys because I already hear podcasts talk about it, and it's August as we're making this video. Let's get back to the article though. Maybe this proves to be off base. The new front office maxed out Cunningham, who they also did not draft, but his ceiling is higher than anyone else on the roster, and until proven otherwise, he remains the force guiding Detroit's direction. So the last part of this article is basically saying that everyone on this roster is expendable. If Langdon really wants to just, trade these guys, since he didn't draft them, he could, because he is the president of basketball operations, but nothing to really go into detail about. So let's kind of give you guys my overall thoughts and just recap this whole paragraph or so from Bleacher Report. I think when you talk about the players that they acquired this offseason, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Tobias Harris. I think Tobias Harris is safe, first and foremost. I don't think there's too many teams knocking on the door to trade for Tobias Harris at $26.5 million. Not to say that Tobias Harris isn't valuable. I just don't see a lot of teams willing to take on $26 million in cap space for Tobias Harris, and I think he's more valuable on Detroit than trying to trade him. I just do. I think Tim Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley, though, on the other hand, those two I could possibly see getting flipped at the deadline if you get good return. Especially Beasley only being on a 1-year, $6 million deal because he's just an elite 3-point specialist. Tim Hardaway Jr., to an extent, could be a sixth man for a contending team. He's on a $16 million expiring deal as well. I think the contracts that they brought in, I think they're valuable. Even re-signing Simone Fontecchio on a really cheap 2-year deal. Again, Pistons aren't really investing long-term money on anyone on this roster outside of Isaiah Stewart and Cade Cunningham. Those are the only two on the roster as of right now that have long-term big money on the Detroit Pistons books. Now, my overall thoughts to what Bleacher Report had to say in this article, I kind of disagree with them saying that the Pistons could trade as much as 3 of their young core because Trajan Langdon did not draft any of these guys outside of Bobby Klitman and Ron Holland. I think this year for the Detroit Pistons, this is an evaluation year. This is an evaluation year for Trajan Langdon and this new front office to see what they have, to see what they're going to do with possibly Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, to see what they're going to do with Isaiah Stewart. Are they going to keep him? Are they going to trade him? To see how does Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson play together. I don't personally think that the Pistons are just going to sell off on multiple guys at the deadline because Trajan didn't draft these guys. No, I could be wrong, but I think the Pistons are going to be much improved. I think they're going to win more than 14 games. I currently have them around that 27 to, possibly 29 win range. I think they have the talent to do it. I think you're getting an innovative coach that knows what he wants to do with the bigs, knows what he wants to do with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. But let me know what you guys think of Bleacher Report's comments about the Detroit Pistons possibly just selling off on the veterans that they brought in and possibly selling off on young players to get maximum value for the players that they are because they're on rookie contracts and Trajan Langdon didn't draft them. Talk to me down below in the comment section what you guys think of this article from Bleacher Report. Like always, hope you guys are staying safe, and I will see you guys tomorrow on the podcast at 7:30. Peace.